All right. So, welcome to Montessori Thrive's Town Hall. We do these every Thursday throughout the school year. These are for Montessori school leaders and administrators, and we hope these are very helpful topics. This is a highly requested topic, and I think we talk about this a lot as Montessori leaders, especially now that free pre-K and free TK programs are more prevalent across the country. I would love for this to be a collaborative discussion. So please hop in if you have anything to add. If you have any questions, please interrupt me. I can't always see the chat, but Camilla is here as well to help. Um, Let me just add a couple more people here.
Lots of people on today's call, which is good because it just goes to show this is a very relevant topic. And
Yeah,
just as we said, please feel free. I'll be keeping an eye on the chat. So if you have any questions, I'll make sure that they're addressed.
thank you, Camilla. So let's talk about why kindergarten retention matters. Kindergarten completes the Montessori 3-year cycle. Dr. Montessori talked about the four planes of development and how important each one is to get to the next cycle of development, right? So completing that infancy plane of development is really important. We know that our Montessori environments support the sensitive periods, especially in this first plane of development. Um, the academic and developmental outcomes peak in year 3. The Montessori classrooms support classroom cohesion and leadership development, especially with those leaders as kindergartners. Higher retention stabilizes enrollment and financial planning. I know that's a big one, right? That's the biggest reason why we want kindergartners, but we also want to think about this is good for children too. We know that child development, we know Dr. Montessori's theory on child development and why that is important. Let's talk about understanding why families leave our programs for kindergarten, for public kindergarten, or for a traditional school. Families don't always understand the 3-year cycle and the importance of that first plane of development. They have a belief that their child will miss out on building new friendships. They have pressure from friends, relatives, or neighborhood norms. There's financial considerations, of course, fear that their child won't be prepared for traditional schools. There's a lack of visibility into what the 3rd year provides.
Julia, before you continue, do you mind
Yeah.
blowing up the screen so it's not so I can see the full presentation? I think some
Oh,
people,
yes. Sorry about that.
I think it's just because you have it on split screen. Thanks, Jill.
Okay, now let me figure out how to do it.
Think if you go to share here, I think it's under advanced sharing options.
Okay.
And I think you might have it selected under split screen.
Um, Here, let me try this. Okay, is that
Perfect.
better?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Okay, what the 3rd year offers children. We know there's a big leap in independence and confidence in that 3rd year. They are completing mastery level learning in reading, writing, and math. They have their leadership roles. They mentor their younger classmates. They're more into deep concentration and more complex work. And the social emotional growth and executive function development is huge. I've seen in my kindergartners some really large projects that they get into. One of my kindergartners completed their own version of The Hobbit. I've seen a lot of people do all the flags of the world, just really complex projects that we don't see with the younger children. what parents don't often see in their child who is kindergarten ready, some subtle readiness indicators, just those small moments of growth that we, if we're not observing carefully, that we miss as well. Those internalized leadership moments and daily progress that isn't always visible at pickup. I'd love to know what you think of when you think of kindergarten readiness. Does anyone have any thoughts on that?
What do you typically tell parents are the highlights of staying within the kindergarten year within Montessori that they would miss out?
How do we participate in this particular conversation? Do I just start talking?
Yeah, Jim, if you're joining us for the first time, welcome. Yeah, just share kind of your thoughts because um, I think it always helps to hear what other school leaders are sharing with parents in their community about what gets people to stay on the kindergarten year. So what do you typically tell families to explain why the kindergarten year is so important?
Well, in our experience, in our circumstance in Santa Barbara Montessori School, our message, we never used the word kindergarten. We never considered the possibility that children would not continue in our program. And so the community that we built when we started this school in 1975 was that we were going to grow and develop a program for children through the ages beginning with 0 to 18. And that was the philosophical statement that we made to the community of three parents that came to our first parent organization, our first discussion. And we that didn't vary over 45 years, over 50 years. It never varied. We were not, in our minds, we were not preparing children to go to kindergarten. We were preparing children to go into our lower elementary class, who would then continue into our upper elementary class, who would then continue into our adolescent class. And I realized that in many circumstances, this is folly and it's unrealistic and it's probably not um, a goal that is quote unquote realistic. But if you don't have that as a goal, then why why are you starting the school in the first place? Because this is it's a Montessori program and it's not a preschool program. It's not preparing children for a non-Montessori experience. And in the first 10 years, we grew from 4 children. We had a primary classroom with 32 to 34 children in it and a lower elementary class. Actually, no, it was a elementary program that was 6 to 12, and we had about 26 children in that group. And I think what happened was that there were definitely parents who made the choice to go into the public sector. And one of the concerns that we expressed to them when they made that, and this is an interesting time, just to interrupt myself, this is an interesting time because here in Pasadena, the process for priority and re-enrollment has already begun for the 2006-2007 school year. So this is a very apropos discussion. But historically, what happened is we would warn, I guess, try and prepare families that made that choice to go to kindergarten. And we talked about how the experience that the child had had, perhaps for 2 years and perhaps even for 2.5, and maybe even the part of the third year, the full third year, was that they were reading. And in the kindergarten environment, they might get introduced to the alphabet with the names of the letters. And so it was more of a how the parents could accommodate this shift in their child's life that didn't follow up on all of the preparation that had taken place and the importance of standing and waiting in line. So I'll stop, but I just really stress the importance of what is the mission statement of the program and what are you trying to do as a school? Because if you are a preschool and you are a daycare program and you're preparing children to go into kindergarten, then you have a responsibility to prepare those families for what that kindergarten experience might be, which is very distinct from cosmic education that is presented in the lower elementary class.
Jim, we will talk about messaging and how to frame kindergarten as not optional. I think at this time, I know I've run into parents' ideas that Montessori school is daycare, especially if they don't have an elementary program. And so trying to combat that belief with we are a school, we have young children, but we are still a school, and this is what we believe is best for human development.
Yes, and you use the word combat, which it, I guess my point is that words matter, that
Mhm.
messages matter, and that in your community of families, if they're looking for a Montessori education for their child, then ideally they have some understanding of what the philosophical basis is, which is it's a lifetime. And I know from my own experience, after 50 years in the classroom and 25 years as an administrator, was that that's not what most families who approach the program, that's not why they're coming in the door. They're coming in the door because someone has told them that it's great. Um, and a family member, or maybe their own experience as a child. Um, I mean, I guess I have the perspective of someone, in the 1960s, Montessori education in the United States was a daycare program, and it was limited to preparing children for public school experience. And there's been this huge transition, and there are now. I mean, we have at Oak Knoll, we have. I would say at least there's a 30% of the parents had some experience in Montessori classrooms as children. So there is a much greater likelihood that families are approaching the school not as daycare or not as preparatory for kindergarten. And I go back to the messaging to families in general that, this is the goal of the school. And of course, if you're just starting out and the goal of the school is to educate adolescents, but you only have 3-year-olds in your program, then it's like, what's wrong with these people? They have visions of grandeur that are delusional. Um, so it depends on um, the I guess the reality of the community, the larger community, and then the parent community, and always reinforcing that idea that this program is for children 0 to 12, 0 to 15, whatever the stated programs are from the school.
For us,
Um,
I was going to say, we tell, when parents come and tour our school here at One World, we let them know from the beginning it's at least a 3-year cycle. We say if you're already thinking of kindergarten for your child, then this probably isn't the right environment for you. We have put deposit, so they actually, when they sign their financial contract the first year, it says if I pull out before the kindergarten year, I forfeit my security deposit. I mean, it's a small thing, but it just makes them stop and think. So just a couple of things that we do.
we have a
Yes.
couple of
Oh, sorry,
great
Camilla, go
suggestions
ahead.
as well in the chat that kind of connect that because realistically, it would be a dream if people would understand the entire approach. Um, but what we found through these town hall discussions is that oftentimes we're just in a constant state of parent education. A couple of good points here. Um, Dee shared our 5-year-olds have so much potential in the third year that they will be ready for elementary or first grade at 6. Going to K anywhere else can be a year of spinning wheels and losing motivation. That's a good way to phrase it. Jill here says, what I've learned through town halls is to give the parents knowledge of Montessori, but also value. But at the end of the day, parents, especially in LA, want the free programs. How do you know when tuition is too high? How do you manage to maintain a strong budget without having to raise tuition? And here, D, has anyone have a set tuition at entry for each child to have a stable tuition for up to 3 years? If anyone has any thoughts on that as well. I think tuition is also a big thing that we need to address when it comes to kindergarten retention. And then here we have Jill shared, I just had a parent email me out to fill out the LAUSD recommendation for a student who is turning 3 in August. They are accepting younger and younger students. This is an alumni family as well, but we are just a pit stop for them. It's frustrating. Dolores says we have a deposit of intent to complete the 3 year cycle. So that's one way, at least just to kind of reinforce the 3 year cycle commitment. Um, D, our AMI consultant helped us create a staggered rate schedule. So they were building a deposit towards the 3rd year. We had wording that emphasized the benefits being reaped in the 3 year cycles. That's another approach to have it built into the tuition system. How much do you charge for the deposit? Here in Massachusetts, as soon as the child turns 5 and is eligible for public kindergarten, we lose the student. We need a strategy and approach to help parents see why keeping a child in pincushion is the best option. Dolores here says it's a 1 month tuition for the deposit. And here, as a former school, I was so I have to search my home computer for wording and amounts. Also, amounts change year on after year and depending on your area and your demographic. So I would look more at what people are charging locally. Rebecca here says, I try avoiding speaking in terms of 3 year as it creates an issue with children who phase up in the toddler year. We speak about kindergarten year being completing primary for the initial tour. We have seen retention go up since we reopened our elementary program. That's a good point. So if you have a program to feed those students into, maybe they are more likely to stay. I think for schools that stop at primary, after primary, there is a fear that because they will have to move to a new school, they will be behind in friendships, they will be behind in the public school system. All right, I'll let Julia continue with her slides.
Can I add something from Texas here?
Sure.
So, like the person from California is saying, we also have the free childcare available at age 3, but it's limited because the state is only providing a certain number of funds. So primarily, it's the economic reason why people are taking their children out and moving them towards the public school. We've had instances where some parents have returned back to us after having experienced the public school and were not happy with it. But for the most part, I mean, we also have a 30-day deposit, 1 month deposit that we charge. But compared to a yearly tuition, which could be 12,000, 1 month is not going to make a huge difference.
Yeah, it's hard to compete with free, definitely.
Here, Texas also has initiated a thing called partnerships with the public schools where, because the concern is if they drain all the 3-year-olds from childcare centers, then eventually those centers will close. And so there isn't enough space at public schools to take over all the preschoolers. So what the state has done is balance the two. So they're saying that the money will go to the public schools, but then if you enter in a partnership with them, they will transfer that money to the childcare provider, provided you maintain the certain standard that is required by the public school. So then you don't lose those kids. They stay with you but the tuition is paid by the state.
That's
I
really
don't know if that's
interesting.
available in California or not.
I believe it's becoming available in a few states. The only issue that I heard that schools run into there is that sometimes um, their states have certain restrictions which interferes with the Montessori philosophy. So it really just depends. It's
Well,
kind of state by state.
Texas passed a new legislative drive where those limitations are no longer valid. So the state cannot use Montessori philosophy as a barrier.
That's good.
So
That's good for
yeah,
Texas.
so as long as the child care center can demonstrate that and they have a certain standard for it. They call the Texas Rising Star program. So you have to go through a certain assessment by the state. And once you pass that and you reach 3 stars minimum, then you can enter into a partnership with the public school district, and then they are obligated to keep those kids with you and pay you the money. That's something we're in the process of doing. But unless, and by the way, I'm sure you guys know that New Mexico is doing universal free childcare. So how are you going to compete with that? That's the first state in the country to provide universal free childcare. Again, that doesn't mean the state is going to open new childcares. It means the parents will get vouchers that they can then give to the childcare center and keep their kids there, but they don't have to pay any money. So it's not elimination
Really
of
interesting concept.
yeah, it's not an elimination of Montessori schools or childcare providers. It's just that the burden is shifting to the state.
Camilla, is there more in the chat before I keep going?
I see here a couple people are saying here the with that Texas law, however, not all Montessori schools are eligible. I guess there are limitations with these, but it's always worth researching and seeing if you can get any kind of support from the state because it is going to be more and more free education. As Mazar mentioned, we're seeing it in New Mexico statewide. We've also seen it in several cities. I believe it's going to be something that is a goal for New York City, which is a big city. See here. Jamie adds
Well,
the clarification they sent out says schools with only AMI USA or IMC accreditation. The comptroller noted the accreditations under Association Montessori Internationale, USA AMI USA, and the International Montessori Council IMC do not currently meet the requirements because they are not listed in the existing education code. So if you're AMI or IMC, you don't qualify.
is that in Texas?
I believe so. That's what Jamie's saying here.
Well, here in Texas, the requirement to join the partnership with the public schools is you have to be a Texas Rising Star certified school, and you have to have minimum 3 stars. 4 is maximum. And not only that, you can also qualify for the education vouchers that are being used here in Texas, starting in 26, where any public school child or student can take the money and go to a private school. That's regardless of the age group. It's all the way up to 12th grade. So if you want to go to a religious school or a certain, or even Montessori school or something else, you just take the money and go.
And it's worth looking at what your state offers. Thank you, Mazar, and thank you, Jamie.
I also want to just say real quick, one of the things that we do, this daily progress that isn't always visible at pickup, is a really important piece, and it's such a relationship model that we have that a few years ago I started. I'm the head of school, and I started just requiring all of our guides to all levels from toddler to elementary to be the one that generally hands off the child to the parent at the end of the day and saying something great that happened that day, or just kind of generally being in relationship about what's happening with their child on a pretty daily basis, even if it's just a little touch in. It does make our pickup line go a little slower, and sometimes we have to make things go around, but parents know how their child is progressing or not progressing and where those sticky points are and things like that, always, and not just at conferences or through transparent classroom or whatever. It's really like one-on-one.
Those are two things that I'll talk about too, Christina, building relationships with families and then making it visible so that they can see that growth. So what families need to hear, the key message is that Montessori kindergarten is the capstone year, the moment everything comes together. I know all of us don't refer to it as kindergarten. Sometimes it's the third year, sometimes it's the leadership year, sometimes it's the capstone year. But what we are all in agreement is that it's an important level in that plane of development. So at the 3-year cycle, we know is intentionally built because of those 4 planes of development. Skills compound exponentially in that final year. The child becomes a leader, not just a learner. They enter elementary more confident and capable. So there have been some research studies that support children staying in Montessori. There's 3 studies mentioned here. The first one says that Montessori kindergarten students show stronger academic and social outcomes. The next one says that studies show benefits in executive function, reading fluency, and math reasoning. And then the consistency in environment supports emotional stability. So having those peers, having the same classroom, having the same guides and teachers, that all makes a difference. So some key retention strategies that work. Start retention conversations early. I know we've talked about this when you're entering the primary program, even when you're entering toddler or NIDO programs, you're talking about the 3-year cycle in primary, and you're, sometimes coming up with ways that parents are signing into contracts or they put down deposits that are saying that their child will stay through that 3-year cycle. You're having regular parent education events. What I've run into in the past is that parents want Montessori because of the prestige, and they know their families are going there, their friends are going there, and they know it's a good program. They don't know what Montessori is and the importance of it. Having transparent progress updates. Are your conference reports showing the skills that they're learning? Are you, like Christina said, are you showing that growth daily? Are you talking about it with parents? Are you showcasing kindergarten leadership? Are you talking about the leadership roles that these students are in? The expectation that they're leading the younger children, but then also being role models for them. And are you using storytelling, not just data? We know data is important. Some parents, learn through the data. Some parents learn through the storytelling. So making both visible. And then making that transition plan to first grade clear. I think a lot of parents have fear about what their child is going to experience when they're moving on to, if that's your elementary program or a public school, another traditional school that's not yours. Just talking with alumni or parents of alumni that have had this happen and knowing that it's normal and that everything is going to be okay. So strategy number 1, starting the conversation early. This is, we've already talked about this a little bit, talking about the 3-year cycle in admissions. Are you talking about it on your tours when they're first coming in, when they're signing that enrollment paperwork? Are you talking about it at conferences and at parent education nights? This is what Jim was talking about. You're framing kindergarten as a planned milestone, not an option. I think a lot of us these days, especially schools that are seeing a lot of families leaving, they're asking, "Are you staying for kindergarten?" rather than saying, "This is what's going to happen when your child is in kindergarten with us." Building relationships with families, and then we talked about this a little bit, contracts or parent intent letters. Parent education. Are you having kindergarten information sessions? Are you showing leadership moments? These can be short videos or reels. This is how you're going to make that visible to families and to parents. Are you putting them on your social media? Are you putting them in your newsletters? How are you showing your younger children's families that these leadership moments are happening? Are you allowing parents to come in and observe and see these leadership opportunities for themselves? And then are you having a written guide or a written brochure, a pamphlet about the 3-year cycle? Make learning visible. Are you allowing the older children to share their work at home? If you have work journals, are you allowing them to bring it home? Again, photos or video snippets, just making that visible in every way that you can. Are you having a kindergarten preview day or an open house that's all about kindergarten if you're having trouble bringing those third-year children in? Another way is having a comparison of skills at the beginning versus the end of the cycle. So a lot of people do like a medal inset, right? When they first get that presentation versus what they're doing in kindergarten. If parents are worried about academics, it's when they're first learning reading and phonics. And you can put these in your newsletters, put them on your website, your blog, your social media, put them in your tour packets. So they're there when parents are first signing up. And then celebrate that leadership, right? This is a big deal. You're assigning leadership roles to your oldest students. You're highlighting these moments again in the newsletters. You're inviting kindergartners to lead parent tours or observation days. We used to have a head of school for the day fundraiser as part of our auction. So a kindergartner would be able to be the head of school and, not make a ton of decisions, but they would often decree one day pajama day, things like that. And then you're showcasing kindergarten projects. So anything that is visible, like a written project, an art project, are you having those up at conferences so parents of younger children can see them? And then for families that have concerns about staying, are you talking about it one-on-one to them? Are you asking what their concerns are so that you can address them? Share your observations about their child's readiness. Do you think it would be helpful for them to stay for that 3rd year? And then any misconceptions, just talking about that gently, right? These concerns are human. If they don't know a lot about Montessori, it's common that they're going to have some concerns. Strengthening community belonging. You're building relationships with those parents as soon as they come in the door, right? You're hosting community events so parents can talk to one another. And you're connecting families with kindergartner ambassadors. So parents of kindergartners that have stayed and they can really share their experience. I mean, many of them are going to have good experiences to share, right? That's your testimonial for why this is important. And then building a strong transition narrative. Explain exactly how Montessori prepares children for 1st grade in whichever program they're planning on going to. Provide sample conference reports showcasing 1st grade readiness. Share alumni success stories. You're hosting transition to elementary panels, bringing back that kindergarten alumni. And you're connecting families to educators in traditional schools. If you know of a school that a lot of your families go to for 1st grade, can you find a teacher that can give feedback on what they see from children in your school transitioning? So what we want to do is remove the barriers and build the value, right? So sometimes you're offering re-enrollment incentives. you want to highlight the value of Montessori. What are they going to learn in that final year? What's going to happen in that final year of the third year cycle versus if they go to a public school or a traditional school? If you can provide flexible tuition structures, I know we talked about staggering a little bit. If you can do that, that would, really bring in some of those people that are worried about finances too. And then emphasize the long-term benefits, not just the kindergarten results. We talk about education for life. Montessori is a philosophy that benefits the whole person. It's not just going to stop once they leave a Montessori school, right? And then I have some more discussion questions too, just to get us started. What has worked well for you? What concerns do your families express most often about staying through that kindergarten year? Have you seen parent engagement activities that have a big impact on retention? How do you invite families to participate in parent education? I know that can be hard sometimes to get them in the door. And then how do we celebrate and communicate student milestones in a way that encourages those families to continue with us? Does anyone have any thoughts on those or other questions that you might have?
I have some general comments. This is Wally. Um, we find that if one of the parents has gone, the parent has gone to the Montessori program themselves, it's a lot easier for their children to continue and not have to. Uh, and again, I think especially at least in our area, uh, families are quite mobile compared to the previous years. I mean, people come and go, and so it's very hard to find too many parents who basically are Montessori children themselves at one time. So that's point number one. I think one of the items that you have is to show the value of Montessori program versus the public program. Now, we can make some general comments, but I think really, I think many schools fall short in terms of conveying that information in a way that it resonates with the parents. Uh, just say that, okay, the child will have more leadership quality and this and that, and just very vague and general terms. I think it doesn't quite sink in. So if they do see the value, many parents will go for maybe third year or maybe elementary program. But I mean, I have not even in the literature come across and talked to people who can really come up with a very, in a very articulate fashion, conveying the value that Montessori will bring and contrasting it with the public education. If we can find that, and I was hoping that AMI will provide us with some guidance and some marketing material that we could benefit from, but it has not come from them. And I mean, I'm still looking for those kind of stuff that I think we can communicate with the parents. So that has been the other thing is that creating relationships with the families, right? That makes a big difference. And I feel that the best individual to do that is the teacher themselves. I mean, it's very hard for administration to go out and reach each and every parent, but I think in a sense that the teacher sees the parents during the carpool. Sometimes they call on the phone, and so they are probably one of the best ambassadors to convey the value and form a relationship. And that doesn't always happen because teachers are overwhelmed, they're busy, they're not thinking about it, they don't see themselves as a marketing person. They feel that okay, they just need to teach what is supposed to be in a classroom, and they're done. I mean, that's the mindset that many teachers have. So those are the areas where I think we struggle with, and we haven't really found a good solution to really overcome some of these things.
If I may, the what worked well for us and what continues to work well is the children in terms of demonstration. So you start with observation, and you have guided observations in the classroom, bringing to the attention of the visiting parents what's happening and what the children are choosing to do, and how that prepares them for the next level of activity. And I think one of the suggestions I've made to AMI trainers over the past several years, because some of the training programs have become fragmented, is to attempt, especially at the Children's House, the primary level, the 3 to 6 year old level, I think there's a preponderance of teachers, guides in the primary classrooms who don't necessarily have a deep understanding
Are you okay?
of the materials in the elementary classroom, and how the primary class experience prepares those children for that elementary level experience. Classic example would be the binomial or trinomial cube. So why is the trinomial cube in the primary classroom if it's designed for lower and upper elementary use? So if those nuances, if the depth and breadth of the material isn't understood by the primary 3 to 6 year old teacher, then they can't convey that message of preparation and the importance of the child knowing how to build a binomial or trinomial cube to what end. And it's an algebraic equation. So observation is one. Testimonials are fantastic from parents, whether it's in a parent discussion forum or whether it's a video. We produced a number of videos for the Montessori Administrators Association, which tried to highlight many of what you are talking about in terms of how does the adult convey this message. And then we always found that the testimonial from the parent and then the actual in-classroom observation, if you only have a preschool program, if you only have the 3 to 6 year old classroom, it's difficult for you to then demonstrate how those children are being prepared for the elementary experience. If you have an elementary program, then you have the natural occurrence is to have the parents from the 3 to 6 year old program observe, guide their observation, hit them over the head with it, how it's their 5 year old is being prepared for this 7 or 8 year old experience. So it's a challenge. And the idea of celebrating and communicating these student milestones is essential if you're working with families that are unsure or haven't made the commitment yet.
We also do a parent workshop each year that's called 6 Going on 7.
Yeah.
And it's specifically designed to help any parent in our primary or elementary for children who will be moving or are thinking, like, what does the elementary program look like? What is it that we're preparing them for? What does that transition look like? Who is your child going to be when they enter the second plane, whether they're here at this school or someplace else? Like, your child is going to be different. And it's really helpful, especially for first-time parents, parents who have gone through it before, and they're like, okay, we know it. But the first time they're here, it's super helpful.
If I may, I'll share the Billy Poucher story, because Julia, you mentioned this, and the idea of contacting the kindergarten teacher or maybe the first grade teacher if you know where a child is going to be transitioning into a public or traditional program. And Billy Poucher was an incredible boy in our program as a 3, 4, and 5 year old, and his mom shared with us early on that he was going to go to public school and that they weren't going to be part of the elementary program. And we accepted that. He could read, he could calculate, he was using the golden beads, he was using the stamp game. I mean, he was a very independent, he could collaborate. And as a 5.5 year old or 6 year old, he ended up being placed in a first grade classroom. And his parents contacted the first grade teacher like after the second week of school. And the teacher was very supportive. And the mom was a little concerned because he was very unhappy. And so when I contacted his teacher, she talked about what a nightmare he was in the classroom, because he finished all of the work sheets and assigned work that was meant to last an entire day. He finished that usually in a matter of minutes. And he could be found every morning. He could be found roaming around the classroom for something to do. And the only thing for him to do was another worksheet. So he, in the first like 3 weeks of school, he had gone through almost her entire curriculum for the entire school year. And his only activity that engaged him was sitting and reading chapter books. So it was it was on one hand it was a good wake up call for me to see what children can experience, and it was it was sad. I mean, it was demoralizing that his ability didn't carry forward beyond our program. And ultimately, he was placed at the time in California. There was a GATE program, a gifted program, and he ended up in that program, but he never quite had the experience that he might have had in our program.
And that's why we're talking about this, right? We want the best for the children.
That's right. Yes, we do.
Jim, do you actually invite the parents to come in and observe in an actively basis, or you just leave it to the parents to come and request an observation?
We traditionally, quote unquote required parents to observe. And we scheduled them, we invited them. We didn't make it mandatory, it wasn't punitive, but we requested that they observe at least twice in the, if you want to call it, the first part of the school year, and then also later in the school year. And um, we the value of it was to over the years, I realized that parents would come and observe and they didn't know necessarily what they were looking at. So I always tried to have a small group. Depending on the size of the class, I would sometimes have as many as 6 parents accompanying me into the environment. And I would pick out individual children's activities or perhaps a lesson that they were having. And it sometimes the engagement was a little bit disruptive. I tried to use a quiet voice. We ended up in the last decade of our program in an ideal situation where we weren't behind a two-way mirror, but we were in a separate area from the actual classroom, and we had about a 300-degree view of everything that was going on in the classroom. And I could speak in a low voice. I could talk about selection of work, the initiation of work on an individual child's basis, making a decision to put work away and go to the shelf and pick new work. So I was like a highlight narrator to the movie that we were watching, but it wasn't a movie, it was real time in the classroom. Secondarily, I would invite parents to come back and observe who had done that with me. I would invite them to come back and have a separate observation on their own. The guidelines, we had printed guidelines that we would give them on a clipboard. We would ask them for their observations to make notes. We requested that they not interact with the children. If a young child came up and said, "Why are you here? What are you doing?" I'm just here. The scripted answer was, "I'm just here to watch you in your activities in the classroom." So, not to, "Hi, how are you? What's your name? How old are you?" So we really discouraged interacting directly with the children because the goal was to give them as much of an experience of what the child's work was as opposed to anything that was being coerced or dictated by the teachers.
Some teachers actually, I know they resist parents coming to observe because they feel that it's distracting their classroom, and literally they just don't like the idea. I mean, and again, you don't want to force it upon them if they don't. But occasionally,
That's too bad. That's too bad for them. No. I mean, it goes back to I don't mean to laugh at the suggestion because I certainly had that experience, but it goes back to the mission of the school. It's like there's several different levels of the responsibility of the adults involved in the school. And one of them is to recognize that, the growth and development of the classroom population has a lot to do with people experiencing, the benefit for the children. And, the teachers, I think each teacher and certainly the assistant teachers and classroom aides have to understand that, it's a moment to moment experience. And if your school is charging tuition, and one of the benefits of that tuition is a salary, and you have employees who aren't volunteering their time, then they have to recognize that, oh, this is a business. These are our customers. These are the people that are, their commitment is helping me as a teacher, realize my goals as an individual. It's all encompassing, and it comes back to the community of the school and the commitment that each teacher is making, and a commitment to the business, a commitment to the philosophy, a commitment to the methodology. And how much do the teachers collaborate, and how much do they understand what their total goal is? And I think another example would be progress reports and parent conferences, because a lot of teachers, I think, approach a parent conference as almost a really miserable experience. And a parent conference can be very revealing and very helpful for the child, because you can, if a teacher is truly inquisitive and curious about the home environment. I learned from Paula Lillard a long time ago the importance of visiting the home environment, especially in situations where a child isn't normalizing in the classroom. So all of these aspects of being a teacher are far and beyond just the lessons that they're preparing.
I think one of the things I've always encountered with teachers who have a hard time with observation, and I agree, it's the best way to get parents to really see and value, is they feel defensive. The teachers are like, I don't want them to see the children doing the wrong thing or the mistakes or things like that. And one of the things I always tell them is that they don't always have the opportunity to talk to the parents right after the observation, but we do. And that's not what parents are seeing. Like 99 out of 100 times, parents come out and say, I can't believe you got my kid to do that. Or that I saw these amazing things. And so helping those guides to relax into having more people in their environments is really important. And one of the ways I do that is telling them, but also I put my butt in that chair over and over and over again, because they also feel a little nervous when I'm there, right? Because I'm their boss and I'm like watching them. So to just help them get used to, like, do your day where it's just observation. And that I've found that the resistance kind of fades away with that.
Yeah, I go back to, I recall a conversation with a parent after an observation. It was that sort of follow-up. And she said, this is amazing. And I said, it is. She goes, no, it's spectacular. And I said, I know it is. It is. And she said, I'm just having such a difficult time accepting it. And I said, it's amazing to see a group of children in this kind and collaborative way function with such civility. And she said, so what I'm having this big revelation. And I said, oh, what's that? She said, well, my children are going to be different. I said, different? She goes, yeah, if they continue in this school, they're going to be different. And I said, different than what? And she said, well, if they go to a traditional school or a public school, then they're going to be different. And I said, yes, you're right. So the environment affects the children and the environment that they develop in. So if the way observations were, and it actually left her somewhat worried, and I had to spend some extra time with her, almost calming her down to realize that the difference was a positive. And it was a wonderful opportunity as opposed to being punitive or miserable because they were going to be different. So I guess and that's the importance, I think, of making sure that people observe and you have the opportunity to process what it is that they have in fact observed.
Kind of going along that thread. So Amy in the chat says, can we talk more about what actual pieces of the Montessori third year people have found successful in showing the value of that year? So what have you shown to families from the Montessori third year that has shown the value of staying?
Well, I don't
Amy
want to
and oh no,
monopolize
go
this
Jim.
conversation.
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
Well, I, so Jack Dodge. So Jack Dodge is now attending a preparatory a high school program outside of London. So he was in Santa Barbara, and he was in a classroom with us as a 5-year-old, very precocious, very articulate, and he observed and absorbed my guided observations to the point where a group of parents came in and he said, Jim, is it all right if I give these parents your observation, presentation? And I said, and I turned to the group of parents. I think there were 5 or 6 parents with me. And I said, what do you think? And they all looked at me and they looked at Jack. And he said, here's an important thing to keep in mind is that when we have lessons in mathematics, we start with like a concrete idea and we start with beads and we count these beads. So here are 1,000 beads. And he held out 1,000 cubes. And these parents looked at him like he was, they just were mystified. And so he went through the golden beads and he said, so these 1,000 beads, we start with this first little bead over here, and then there's 10 of them, and then there's a square. So the idea of a child that young being able to articulate something that the parents identified with, it was, and he said, so we can make numbers like 3,452. And here, and so I had these things, they were like props, and I already had them set up in the classroom. And so he handed them the tray and he showed them what 3,452 looked like. So the idea that the children are capable of demonstrating, and this is what I tried to do in my TEDx talk, where I took the binomial cube and I would show to parents the young child putting together the binomial cube. And then I showed another child in my TEDx presentation doing the mathematical calculations with the binomial cube. And then we did, at the third level, it was the algebraic application. So there's so many levels of materials where, actual activities of the children that clearly demonstrate to parents and the community, if you go outside the classroom. The video, of course, is a possibility. I can remember each time we took students to Europe in our adolescent program, we always came back and had an Italy night or a European night. We had the children do the presentations with their photographs, their reports, their journals. We did a lot of our parent education would include presentations by the students. So again, that the value of having the elementary program up and running doesn't necessarily negate the question of kindergarten and children leaving, but it demonstrates literally for parents perhaps trying to make that decision. It's like, oh, this is this program's elementary program. Oh, look, the adolescents are also productive because of what they did as elementary students, because of what they did as primary. So I don't know. I just get lost in how wonderful the whole experience is for families who go through the whole program. And, that's, if I go back to the idea of building a community of parents and families, then that's the most successful aspect of the whole experience, is that it can have that continuity.
Thank you, Jim. And I think that also ties into one of the points that Julia shared in this presentation, that storytelling is really, really important for retention in Montessori. There's so many things that set us apart that parents maybe just don't understand. And I'm glad that Amy pointed out that yes, the financial concern is there, but it is not the only challenge. Montessori has always competed with public preschool. Now we're just competing it for the lower programs, but it's always been there. And I think storytelling, real life examples, alumni, parents who are there to also tell your story, that can make a real difference with retention. Um, so thank you, Jem. I think that was a good example of that. Here, Amy's asking, what about for small schools that um, do not and never will have an elementary program? Yeah, that is another thing. And this is also a lot of Montessori schools. The majority of Montessori schools go through primary. So that is a huge chunk of the community that don't have elementary programs. And I think that is where the parent concern is what comes next. So I do think it helps to have kind of an exit plan in place for those parents to ease their anxiety, whether it's going to public school, whether you're recommending another Montessori school that does have an elementary program, and you have a partnership or a bridge there for them, easing their concerns about readiness, academic readiness, that's usually, or socialization readiness. Um, that is something that parents are typically concerned about. Does anyone else come from a school with those types of that stops after primary? And how have you navigated that? Here, Christy says we try to partner with schools that don't have elementary in order to give them options. Um, Dolores, absolutely, Marlene. That's why they're always. Oh, here, Marlene also mentioned, well, observations are great, a great window into the child's day. I think it would be great to also be mindful about the child's social emotional flexibility to the change in routine. Having a child's behavior be different with a parent and providing an opportunity for the teacher to chat about it afterward, just a thought. Yeah. Obviously, that's going to shift their behavior in the classroom. Yeah, anyone else have any kind of ideas on what to do? Here, Robin says, we have some elementary schools who require children to compete, that children complete kindergarten in their school. So we have children leave our Montessori program to complete K in the new Montessori elementary school. Yep, that does happen. Yeah, it's unfortunate. And it also happens a lot with other private school programs that are maybe non-Montessori. They say, oh, if you want to ensure a spot, you need to be here for kindergarten. And that's a difficult challenge to address. Likely that there's really nothing that you can do because if you don't have a program for them afterwards, they have to make the right decision for the long term.
It seems to me that it's a lot easier to keep the children throughout the third year or elementary program if you are in a bad public school district compared to being in a good school district. I mean, that becomes a much, much more challenging issue because parents know, hey, this is I mean, they know by reputation, hey, it's a great school district, and they're less likely to really listen to some of the things that one has to say. So I've seen that, you know, even in our metropolitan area, depending on where the school is located, it does make a difference.
So I think for us in LA, economically, even though some of the schools aren't the best in the process for applications to get into gifted and talented and STEM schools and all of the charters, still because economically a lot of our families do leave, even though our program can provide more as far as a substantial program in growth and development. So that's kind of like our struggle and our struggle too with just the universal TK programs. So I would say economically, that's how it affects us. That even though we don't have the best schools in the area, it's still just LA is just expensive. So yeah, it ends up being economical.
I mean, we noticed that this year too, I think last year, because I think there were more spaces available in the pre-K program. So we had the highest number of people leaving after the second year than we have ever had before, because I think and I think part of it is economics. The economic situation was not good. Many of the parents were anxious about their job stability and things like that. So we had, I think, particularly poor year last year with respect to retaining the third year.
Here's some more things in the chat. Christy says, we are in an excellent public school district, which is why we bring up in the very first observation, if you are thinking of going to your public school, this may not be the right fit for you. Rebecca says, yep, again, it might be helpful to speak about staggering tuition. And Susie says, we are now working on parent education to inform the parents about how Montessori works and the benefits to have their children for the 3-year cycle. Our school is 10 years old, but challenged by public kindergarten. So now we are focusing on educating our community to try to build culture and have our first 3-cycle generation. We serve children 6 weeks to 6, but the community would rather take them and have them join public school as soon as they can, even though they are happy and pleased with what we are offering. Yeah, again, like how you frame kindergarten, I think is going to be really important. Framing it as not an option. And again, going back to the staggering tuition. Um, let's see where we are in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. There are a lot of schools closing in the local public school district, and we've been trying to think of ways on how to attract those parents if we can. Oh, Rebecca, well, what do you mean by staggering tuition to promote kinder? My understanding is that you're charging more for tuition in the first couple years of the cycle, and then kindergarten is less expensive tuition. All right. Thank you, everyone, for the lively discussion. I know this is a topic that is relevant to many schools. Next week, we are talking about the power of role play, developing social emotional learning skills through grace and courtesy. And we'll have a guest speaker, Rena Morgan. She's a parent coach. So I hope to see you all next week. I will have this recorded.